There is a doctrine called the Comptroller General's binding opinion. It appears in no law you have ever voted on, and it has controlled every dollar the federal government spends since 1921. One officer, no election, no repeal mechanism, and every agency in the executive branch is required by custom stronger than statute to obey it. The Comptroller General runs the Government Accountability Office, the GAO. Most people have heard of the GAO. They think it is an auditing shop, a report factory, watchdogs who write findings that get ignored. That is not what it is. The Comptroller General issues legal opinions, formal, numbered, published decisions on whether the federal government can spend money in a particular way, on a particular thing, for a particular purpose. And those opinions bind the agencies. Every department in the executive branch, Defense, Treasury, HHS, every one of them treats a Comptroller General opinion the way a private citizen treats a court order, except no court issued it, no judge signed it, and you never voted for the person who wrote it. This authority did not come from Congress passing a law that said the Comptroller General shall have binding legal power. It accumulated. The Budget and Accounting Act of 1921, Public Law 6713, created the office and gave the Comptroller General authority to settle federal claims. That was the door. Everything that came after walked through it without a key. Over the next 100 years, agencies started asking the Comptroller General whether specific expenditures were legal. The Comptroller General answered. Agencies followed the answers. The answers became precedent. The precedent became doctrine. No vote. No amendment. No enabling statute containing the word binding. Just a century of deference that calcified into something functioning exactly like law and now treated as law without ever having been enacted as law. The GAO's index of decisions runs to millions of entries, millions of legal determinations. Not one passed a committee. Not one was signed by a president. The Comptroller General is appointed to a 15-year term. 15 years, longer than any senator's standard term and longer than most cabinet careers combined. And here is what the appointment coverage always skips. The president cannot remove them. Under 31 U.S.C. Section 703, the Comptroller General can only be removed by a joint resolution of Congress, both chambers, or by impeachment. The executive branch has no mechanism to fire the one officer whose opinions govern how the executive branch spends money. That is not an accident. That is architecture, designed before your parents were born, and no one has changed it since. Here is what this means in concrete terms. An agency head appointed by the president, confirmed by the Senate, accountable to voters through that chain, decides to spend appropriated funds on a program, a legitimate program, one that reasonable people might support. The Comptroller General examines the appropriation language and issues an opinion that the expenditure does not fit the purpose Congress stated. The money cannot move, not because a court blocked it, not because Congress passed a new law, because one officer issued an opinion that nobody voted to give binding force, and 100 years of deference made it real. This happened in 2020. The GAO ruled that the Trump administration's withholding of military aid to Ukraine violated the Impoundment Control Act of 1974. That ruling, issued without a judicial proceeding, without any enforcement mechanism, the GAO itself controlled, became the evidentiary spine of the first impeachment. One opinion from an unelected officer running an office most Americans cannot name shaped the constitutional trajectory of a presidency. Remember, no one voted for this. The power to issue that ruling, to have it carry the weight it carried, to make it the foundation of a constitutional proceeding, none of that was enacted by a legislature. It arrived the way entrenched power always arrives, quietly, and then it was simply there. Congress could, theoretically, strip the Comptroller General's opinions of binding force, rewrite the Budget and Accounting Act, subordinate the GAO to the judiciary. None of that has happened in over a century, and here is why it will not. Congress created this office to constrain the executive branch. The Comptroller General is Congress's instrument for policing how presidents spend money, Eliminating that power would mean Congress voluntarily surrendering its primary tool for watching the executive. No Congress will do that. The power that was never voted into existence cannot be voted out of existence because the people who would have to vote it out depend on it too much to let it go. And here is the part that should actually worry you. It is completely legal. Everything described here is operating exactly as designed. The Comptroller General's authority is not a loophole. It is not a glitch. It is the intended architecture of a government that decided in 1921 to create a permanent officer with permanent interpretive authority and then never revisited whether that was wise. Every institution you interact with has a version of this, a rule never quite enacted, a body whose authority was never quite granted, a doctrine that accumulated so slowly that by the time anyone noticed, removing it had become unthinkable. The GAO is simply the version that touches the money, which is why the one that touches the money is the one you should understand first. So the question is not whether this power will ever be reformed. It will not. The question is how many other offices are operating exactly this way right now, issuing decisions, building precedent, binding agencies, with authority that was never written into any law you were ever shown.